After 3 years of her mother's passing, a daughter returns to the human world. She is excited and goes forward to embrace her long-missed daughter, but unexpectedly, she passes right through her, missing her entirely. Fukuzi, who participated in a contest in heaven, was rewarded with 3 days to return to the human world. Because her greatest attachment was to her daughter, she allowed the messenger to take her to her daughter's side. However, when she arrived, she was stunned to find that her daughter had settled in the United States. How could this be? She wondered. But just as confusion filled her mind, her daughter, Shinju, walked out of the house. Fukuzi's heart raced with excitement as she rushed to her daughter, only to discover that she couldn't interact with her. After the messenger explained a few things, they quickly left. Three days later, the messenger returned to take Fukuzi back, but Fukuzi had already forgotten the messenger's words. Now, she was desperate to understand what had happened that brought her daughter back to the countryside. So, she decided to observe. She noticed that, even though she had been gone for 3 years, not much had changed at home. However, her daughter had changed significantly. Once unwilling to do any housework, Shinju was now repairing a broken chair. Was she thinking of becoming a carpenter? Then, 2 strangers arrived. It turned out that her daughter had inherited Fukuzi's old restaurant, Fuzi South Gate. Shinju, who had never been able to cook before, was now running the restaurant herself. She moved effortlessly, preparing a full spread of rustic dishes as though she had been cooking for years. Later, the customers devoured the food, and Shinju respectfully sent them off. She then went straight to roasting coffee beans. Fukuzi recognized the stove. She had used it to cook for Shinju when she was still alive. At that time, she had been so eager to call Shinju, wishing to share a meal with her on this very stove, but Shinju impatiently hung up the phone. When Fukuzi came back to her senses, she saw Shinju sitting in the doorway of the old house, sipping a rich cup of coffee. The evening sun bathed her in a lazy glow. Fukuzi couldn't bear to watch anymore. She had once rejected returning home, yet now, here she was, suffering again. All of her complaints turned into a soft breeze. Fukuzi wandered by Shinju's side all day long, waiting until Shinju fell asleep, but by midnight, Shinju suddenly woke up, gasping for breath. After calming down, Shinju ran out of the house, desperate to escape something. Running until she reached the riverbank, where she finally stopped. "I can't live like this, Mom. I can't live like this because of you," Shinju cried, her voice filled with despair. It was then that Fukuzi realized that her daughter, despite her calm demeanor during the day, was not as carefree as she seemed. Shinju had been struggling deeply. The next day, Fukuzi accompanied her daughter to the hospital, where she learned that Shinju was suffering from depression, a condition that had roots in her own death. Shinju had never gotten over the fact that, as a child, Fukuzi had handed her over to her uncle because of financial hardship. Over the years, Shinju had never been able to forget this painful memory. After leaving the hospital, Shinju put on her usual smile and met an old friend at the station. However, as they made their way home, they were stopped by a couple at the village entrance. The couple insisted that Shinju be kicked out of the village because she had refused to move, which prevented the developers from building a golf course that could bring in more money than farming. Despite the heated arguments, Shinju remained calm, as though this was a routine event. She simply grabbed her friend and started preparing food. Soon, a bowl of fragrant noodles was ready, and the neighbors who had just scolded her were silenced by the delicious meal. Jinju's actions of responding with kindness were due to the fact that the neighbors didn't truly want her gone. They knew how much she was suffering after losing her mother and how her life had changed. After settling the situation with the neighbors, Jinju's friend noticed her illness and shared the same concerns. Yet Jinju didn't see the seriousness of her condition. She felt that if she had been in a better situation, she wouldn't have to worry about the past anymore. The root of her depression lay in her mother's death. She had once argued with her mother and gone to the United States, and on the day her mother passed away, Jinju couldn't return in time to say goodbye. Her mother's body was buried late, as she had waited for Jinju to come back. One evening, Jinju and her friend sat down for a meal of dumplings, her favorite childhood food. Even though she tried to replicate the taste of the dumplings her mother used to make, they never tasted the same. It wasn't until a conversation with her mother's friend that Jinju realized she had forgotten to add radish, a crucial ingredient. After 2 more attempts, she finally recreated the taste from her memories, but it was hard for her to swallow. She couldn't help but reflect on how she had missed out on so much with her mother. In her memories, she could still hear the sound of her mother's voice and feel her love. It was then that Jinju understood the depth of her mother's love and the pain she had gone through. When Fukuzi arrived in the city where Jinju worked, she brought a lot of food, but Jinju wasn't happy to see her. She was frustrated that her mother had come uninvited and made things awkward. Her mother, in a quiet way, tried to show Jinju that she still cared, but Jinju was too upset to see it. After some time, Jinju finally understood the struggles her mother had faced and the sacrifices she had made for her. At the hospital, Fukuzi's friend revealed some old stories. When Fukuzi was young, she had dreamed of working in a big city, but her family forced her to stay and work on the farm. Later, she married an unreliable man and had Jinju, but the man left her. To support Jinju's education, Fukuzi was willing to marry a man who would take care of Jinju's expenses, even though the condition was that she couldn't bring Jinju with her. This revelation shocked Jinju, and she felt an immense sense of regret. She was filled with guilt for not understanding her mother sooner. She wished she could turn back time and make up for the lost moments. The story ends with Fukuzi, having completed her mission, preparing to say goodbye to her daughter for the final time. The messenger came to take her back, and Fukuzi made one final request, to see her daughter again. But to do this, Fukuzi had to make a huge sacrifice. She would forget everything about Jinju. Fukuzi agreed to this painful choice, knowing it would help Jinju move on. The night sky brightened, and Jinju awoke to find her mother finally back in the house, as if she had just come home after a long day. Together, they celebrated her mother's birthday, just like the old times. Fukuzi watched her daughter with love and joy, and for the first time in a long while, they both smiled. Their time together was brief, but it was filled with warmth and understanding. Fukuzi's wish had been granted, and she knew her daughter would be okay.